So, the economic war has taken a very big turn. For many years, we have seen China on the defensive. Now, if this were a boxing match, Beijing has been taking many body blows from the US. There's the tax sanctions, the tariffs on Chinese steel, and of course the TikTok ban. But China is moving on the offensive now. President Xi is moving to secure his economy and wrestle control away from the US. Xi Jinping is heading to the EU. He'll be visiting France, Serbia, and Hungary, and each of these countries hold particular significance to China's relations with Europe. France is the second biggest economy in Europe. Together with Germany, trade with them is a key part of China's strategy. The EU is still a big market for China to sell into. The EU accounts for 40% of Chinese EV exports, and by the end of the year, a quarter of all car sales in Europe will be from China, and that's very staggering. If we dig into the numbers, we'll quickly understand why Europe is still an important market for Chinese companies. The margins there are off the hook. The seal car from BYD enjoys 11 times more profit when sold in Europe compared to China, $15,000 versus just 1400. Even if the EU slaps a 30 or even 40% tariff on Chinese EV imports, it's still massively profitable for the Chinese EV makers to export there. And all this is a consequence of China's vertical integration in manufacturing. All the moving parts of the supply chain can be obtained in one single country. There's the skilled labor, cheap energy, and abundant raw materials. But it's not just a one-sided relationship. Xi Jinping's visit to the EU is a reminder of that. Many EU automakers have factories and production facilities in China as well. Companies like Volkswagen, BM, Renault, and Mercedes, they all have joint ventures in China. And this allows them to build cheap cars in Beijing and sell them back into the EU market. In fact, at least 5% of EV cars sold in Europe are from these joint ventures, and in total, 19% of EVs sold in Europe comes from a Chinese factory. Both local Chinese automakers and Western companies are benefiting. Even Tesla is building cars in China. It's this interdependence with Europe that President Xi wants to grow, to build stronger economic ties with the EU. Chinese manufacturing isn't really a threat. In fact, Europe can use it to make their own exports cheap and ultra competitive. Now, one destination of the trip is really interesting, and that is Serbia. Xi Jinping is visiting the country on a very special date, the 25th anniversary of NATO's bombing of China's embassy in Belgrade. There's big symbolic significance in this. It's a reminder that China hasn't forgotten what the US has done to their embassy. It's also a message to Europe on the importance of autonomy and thinking for yourself. Serbia is one of the few European countries that have great relations with China. They also haven't sanctioned Russia either. And if Europe works with China, there's a lot of benefits to be had. Now, there's a reason why many EU leaders are going to China. Olaf Scholz just went to Beijing. Italy's Meloni is about to travel there as well. And it's all about accessing China's consumer market. According to the Brookings Institute, by 2027, which is just 3 years from now, 1.2 billion Chinese people will be in the middle class. And that's one quarter of the entire world's total in one single country. That's 4 times the entire population of the US. So it's a market that Europe simply can't ignore. They can't just sell to the US only. There's simply not enough customers there. Take German automakers for example. The big three, Mercedes, Volkswagen, and BM, sell at least a third of their cars to China. Conversely, exports to North America are well under 15%. And if you take China out of the equation, many EU companies could go under. Revenues will be destroyed, profits will evaporate, and jobs will be lost. And if we get into a trade war, China could very well impose tariffs on EU products as well, and that could be devastating. And when we talk about the trade between the EU and China, the topic of trade deficit always comes up, and that Europe is exporting less to China than what they import in. And if we look at the data, it is true, the numbers simply don't lie. China's exports to Europe are in black, and their imports from the EU are in pink. It's clear that the EU has a trade deficit with China. Throughout the EU, including Germany, France, and Italy, Beijing is selling more compared to what they are buying in. But that's only half of the picture. Europe imports a ton of raw materials from China, and this includes electronics, chemicals, and machinery. And with China exporting deflation to the world, This allows the EU to manufacture their products at a cheaper price. In other words, if Europe were to cut away Chinese imports, their products would be less competitive with the rest of the world. Their input costs will rise. And if we look at the EU's trade balance with the world, they are back up to a positive. Europe is making money from global trade. It collapsed over the last 2 years because of higher energy prices, but because gas is getting cheaper and affordable inputs coming from China, Europe is getting competitive once again. And that is good for EU companies and really helps them with job growth as well. So, where is Europe getting their wealth? The answer lies in this chart. It reveals to us a lot. The EU's biggest trade surplus comes from the UK and the US, and those are the bars in green and orange. Europe is exporting more to the West and earning money there. They have a trade deficit with China today because a ton of imports are actually raw materials used to make EU products. China is simply providing the cheap inputs that Europe uses to make stuff for the US. So there's a real symbiotic relationship between China and the EU. Both benefit from trade with each other. And that's why we must zoom out and take a holistic look. Things are not what they seem. There's a reason why EU companies are relocating to China and why Europe still imports a ton of Chinese goods. It's not by accident, it's all by design. For nearly a year, we have been hearing China's economy is on the brink, that the collapse is coming, but the recent data is showing quite the opposite. China factory activity holds up, signaling recovery has legs. The PMI numbers are out, and it shows an expansion in factory activity. Despite the global slowdown, China's industries are still growing. The official and private numbers are showing positive growth for China's economy. Beijing's pivot to the industrial production to save the economy is really working. It's quite likely they will meet their 5% GDP target for 2024. And this is a good sign of economic growth. This helps to unlock a virtuous cycle for the domestic economy. Where factories are producing, local Chinese people have jobs. This allows domestic consumers to slowly recover. Trying to revive domestic demand isn't something very easy. The property collapse has done a number on local consumption, and it's going to take a while for locals in China to start buying more stuff, especially if they are imported in from Europe. Domestic consumers are still strong. Consumption accounted for 82% of China's overall GDP growth, so there's a very big market to be had, but it all centers around price. Now, if Europe wants to capture more Chinese market share, the easiest way is to build a factory in China. Chinese consumers care a lot about the cost in addition to quality. You need both. Using the superior supply chain to make cheaper products and sell to the consumer directly, that is a winning recipe. And that's what Tesla, Volkswagen, and Siemens are doing. Now, the challenge China faces today is to build back consumer confidence, and that means shoring up the property crisis. China home sales are still slumping. In April, home sales by the top 100 developers are down by 45% versus a year back. Obviously, this isn't good. It's the classic wealth effect. People's paper wealth drops, they feel poorer, and so they spend less. Trying to reverse this isn't easy. It's going to take a lot of time. To make China more attractive to the world, especially Europe, Beijing has to contain the property crash. The Politburo has called for faster issuance of special sovereign and government bonds, and this is a major source of funding for infrastructure projects. Remember that China is a planned economy. The real estate implosion was a controlled demolition, which means the recovery is also managed by the state. Now, if Beijing goes ahead with their targeted stimulus, a property rebound is coming, and by extension, domestic consumption will gradually recover as well. Now, the French, for example, recognized the potential of the Chinese market. Even before President Xi's visit to Paris, Airbus is trying to seal the deal. The aircraft maker is trying to close a major order with Beijing, with some saying it involves hundreds of planes. According to Airbus, China's traffic will grow by 5.3% annually over the next 2 decades. That's 50% more than the global average of 3.6%. And with air travel booming, it's only natural for Chinese carriers to buy more planes. And considering the state of Boeing planes today, plus the US China tensions, France will probably win the deal. It's important we talk about Hungary as well. Of the entire EU bloc, it is the most friendly country to both Russia and China. They are part of the Belt and Road project, and there's a lot of trade going on. Outside of Europe, China is the biggest trading partner with Hungary. Bilateral trade has grown to $14.5 billion last year, and like the rest of the EU, there's a big trade deficit going on as well. However, that's just trade, Because of good relations, Chinese companies, they're all flocking to Hungary. Billions of dollars are about to flow into the economy to build up their country. Orban wants to make Hungary into a battery making hub, and getting China involved is a masterstroke. In terms of EV battery production, China is the world leader. Estimates put their capacity at over 7 million. Hungary is in fourth place, but with China's help, they will surpass bigger countries like Germany very soon. And this is important for Orban. If the future is EVs and Europe needs low cost batteries, Hungary's trade with the EU will explode. And with China's help, their production capacity is going to rise fast. China's Amprex Technology or CATL has committed to building a 7.6 billion facility in Hungary, and this is in partnership with Mercedes-Benz, which will create over 9,000 jobs for the country, more employment for local Hungarians, and this will be the biggest foreign direct investment into Hungary by a big margin. It's essentially a game changer that combines the best of both worlds, Chinese money and expertise together with Hungary's position in the EU. The plant will have enough capacity to power 1 million cars, and it will be in close proximity to customers in Europe. And this includes BM, Stellantis, and Volkswagen. And this is a game changer for Hungary. But the investments don't just end there. There are rumors that President Xi will announce another shocking partnership between Hungary and China. The Chinese automaker Great Wall Motors might be building its first European car factory in Hungary, and if this happens, it will turn Hungary into a hub for cheap EV manufacturing. You'll have the batteries and the cars being made in the country, and considering Hungary's unique position, they can export to both the EU and China as well. Orban still has access to cheap Russian gas, let's not forget about that. So energy costs are low compared to Western Europe. This is Beijing's charm and money offensive. They are on a mission to win over Europe from the US. As it stands, China is still a big trading partner for the EU. Even for exports, China is the bloc's third largest destination. In 2023, they sold over 220 billion euros worth of goods to Beijing. Trade with Europe is extremely important for China as well, and it all has to do with US sanctions. Now, the more China trades with the world, the harder it is for Biden to punish their economy. During her trip to Beijing, Yellen gave China a very big threat, and that was sanctions on Chinese banks, threatening to cut them away from the US financial system over trade with Russia. Now, if Chinese firms keep supporting Moscow's war effort, at least according to the US, they could get blocked from the dollar system. And the best way to counter this is to build even stronger trade ties with the world, Europe included. And if the US decides to sanction China, they will have to destroy global trade as we all know it. Yellen will have to break global supply chains. She will have to force countries to dump the dollars for the yuan to buy Chinese goods, and that won't be good for the dollar or the US economy. China's imports and exports with the world is the deterrent to US sanctions. Yellen can't touch China as long as their trade is expanding globally. So building good relations with the EU is just as important for Beijing, and for Europe's case, is perhaps the only way left to stay competitive. But let me know what you think. Will Europe embrace China to save their economy? Or will they follow the US and rebuff President Xi? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.